Today on BRStv, probably the most exciting thing is someone's going to win a $1,000 Gem Tang from Marine Collectors, which is many reefers' dream tang. But we also explored the next component of the BRS WWC hybrid system with the first of 3 maintenance components, water changes, implemented here on both the Red Sea Reefer XXL 750, smaller all-in-one Red Sea E-Series 170, and the BRS 160. We'll also share some of the new fish we have in the tank and where we got them. Hey, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv. This week we have episode 16 of the BRS WWC hybrid system. In this series we're developing a method of dealing with almost every major reefing topic and assembling them into one cohesive system that above all else is simple and stable. This hybrid system will also address a variety of budgets and skill levels almost anyone can follow, and we expect to achieve very similar results. Hopefully exploring these methods in a manner where, regardless of experience level in the hobby, learn something new or use WWC and BRS team's experiences to refine our knowledge. In this series, we're going to explore what we believe to be the 8 core components of a successful reefing system: filtration, lighting, flow, the cycle, chemistry, coral nutrition, husbandry, and the maintenance rhythm. In that spirit, we're talking the first major component of the maintenance rhythm: water changes. I think water changes are currently the most hotly debated item out there: size, frequency, and frankly, if you should even do them at all. Today we won't be able to identify what is the best for everyone because that's a mythical creature, but we can provide you the information so that all of you can decide what's best for your needs or desires, as well as document this component of the hybrid series and a clear path to follow for anyone who wants to achieve the same results as the WWC tanks and what we're going to produce here. Before we get too far into this, I thought we'd give a brief update on how things are going and some of the fish we just added. As you can see, the lights are now on and the ugly stage has begun with some cyano and such on the rocks. New tanks can take a variety of paths, but most of them will have some sort of ugly phase in the beginning. In the end, as long as the system parameters are stable and the desirable elements like flow and filtration are operating appropriately, it's often best to just leave it alone and let it play itself out. If it goes on too long, feel free to treat it before the corals go in. The weight might be hard on a new tank, but not a big deal for most people on their second or third tank, where patience is just part of the game. We'll probably give you another update in a few weeks before our first test corals go in. You can see we did add some new fish this week with a captive bred yellow tang, a marginellus butterfly, a zebra tang, which Chad here at BRS sourced for us. Chad also runs his own site on Boston Aquatics where he has some captive bred fish available. Some of you may have noticed the blennies and orchid dottybacks as well. They also came from Chad's breeding program on his website. Outside of that, we're also excited to work with Elliot over at marinecollectors.com, and he sent us some healthy, fully quarantined fish with a pair of male and female blue draw triggers, purple tang, and of course a beautiful Gem Tang. Elliot's been super solid to work with, and he's also the one giving away that Gem Tang to all of you this week. Over the coming weeks, you'll get to see some of the other fish that he sends us. If you check out marinecollectors.com, you might not see a whole lot for sale because that's not really their focus. If you're looking for someone to source rare to somewhat high-end fish, ensure health, perform a tank transfer medicated quarantine for you, and ensure delivery of healthy, high-end fish, he's my own personal resource. Not a real solution for your average $30 clownfish. If you're looking to work with someone who will work with you to build an amazing stocking list for your tank, and part of their daily function is to walk all the LA wholesalers for the healthiest and most attractive specimens, I think I'd at least reach out to Elliot about his process. I think this type of thing is what a lot of reefers are looking for but didn't know where to find it. If you do, let them know Ryan sent you. Okay, getting on to today's main topic, the first question we always answer in all this is what can you expect by doing this well, meaning regardless of your approach, you nailed it. Well, in this case, it could mean a variety of things. Could mean you made the water changes simply less work. Could mean that you're maintaining salinity properly, related to that minor and trace elements. Could be a nutrient export solution, as well as a general intended or unintended contaminant export method. I will note that the right water change approach will drastically reduce the chances of various pest outbreaks, particularly algae outbreaks, and chemistry or pollutant-based coral mortalities. No matter what I say here, half the reefers out there are going to nod their heads, and half will say, no, that's not true in my system, and I think it's very likely accurate because the water change solution needs to be matched to the system age, nutrient input, export, and overall system design. Not to say it has to be complex, just a tiny bit of thought and common sense will produce the best results. Like starting a tank with no water changes from the beginning is very likely not a winning or highly replicable approach to a successful reef tank. Okay, so with that goal in mind, I always like to look at this first from the angle of what almost everyone universally agrees on. By that, I mean like 9 out of 10 reefers, understanding there's always that mix of documented proven items, research, and well understood or accepted general theory. So in that spirit, everyone agrees that replacing old water with freshly mixed salt water is an effective method for partially increasing depleted elements or partially removing undesirable contaminants. Water changes are the one thing that you can count on for almost certain. Skimmers may work, GFO or carbon may work on your issue, carbon dosing could help, trace element solution may work, but none of them are as close to a sure thing as a water change. Water changes just work. That said, I said water changes are a partial solution because even a huge 50% water change means 50% of what you want to remove is still in there. That also means if the element you want to replace is 50% depleted, a super huge 50% water change will only bring it back up to 25% depleted. I guess I'd call water changes the ultimate stabilizer, meaning while dilution is an imperfect approach, it's not relying on a plethora of tests, trace element solutions, or advanced nutrient export solutions. Water changes just work when done consistently on a schedule. I think it's also universally true that older established tanks with tons of coral biomass can get away with very few water changes, particularly if they're very in tune with the tank. Meaning those older established tanks, the coral uptakes most of the excess nitrate and phosphate. There are a variety of ways to manage minor and trace elements, as well as general unintended pollutants. That said, there are a ton of paths to success here, and it's our goal and the goal of this hybrid series to share the paths which are the most likely to lead to long-term success. I think there's a ton of good reasons to perform water changes with any tank, and putting the effort into making the water changes easier probably has a higher degree of likelihood of taking you to that 5 to 10 year dream tank that you're looking for than putting effort into avoiding water changes. Another universally true statement is the water change and dilution will only be as effective as the water source and salt mix. Almost all of you use RODI water, so I'm not going to spend time on that. And open and honest, I think any salt mix is good enough to keep things alive. Which salt mix is best is about as debatable as it gets, but there are some definitive differences which are absolutely measurable and have value. So I'm going to go on a limb here and say that it's universally true that some salt mixes are better than others. For instance, some reefers are looking for some specific things and would be willing to pay a few bucks a month for something that achieves them. For instance, the salt is clean and doesn't fill your storage container with muck. The salt is stable and once mixed can be stored for a prolonged period of time with no to minimal precipitation or nutrient issues. Maybe just because the levels match your tank levels and don't need to be adjusted prior or after use. And of course, less functional and a little bit more peace of mind, quality of raw materials. One thing I'm also going to say is universally true is auto water changes are awesome. If you haven't done it yet, you might shrug at this, but anyone who has done it will say, where have you been all my life? We'll never be apart again. Seriously, with a bit of effort, routing some tubes under the floor ceiling or around the baseboards, you can never touch a bucket of water again and maintain all the advantages of water changes. For instance, on our Softy and polyp ULM tank outside of the auto water change tank, the only thing we ever really do on this tank is fill the auto feeder once a month, refill the all for reef occasionally, and clean the glass. In my opinion, auto water changes are one of the primary pillars of setting up a tank that doesn't take over your life, triple so in the first few years, and because of that could be one of the pieces of equipment that help newer reefers get past some of the hardest stages of a reef tank. Relate that it's absolutely true that auto water changes can waste some salt because it's sucking out a small portion of fairly new salt water with the old. There are ways around that, but I think for most reefers, we're talking about 10 gallons of wasted salt water a month, which is like $3 to $5. But even on a super mega tank, it's probably still less than almost any other effort applied to the tank. Another statement I'm going to say today is almost universally true is the amount of each one of these salts say they make is near a complete fabrication. Some have the courtesy of telling you on the back that when mixed to a certain salinity level, it will make more or less water, but mixed to 1.026 or 35 ppt, nearly none of them will make the 160 to 200 gallons in the front of the bucket. I think Randy has a plan to do a BRStv Investigates on a variety of salts for actual costs so we can share the actual cost per gallon as well as update the website so it's easier to make decisions. The last universally true statement I'm going to throw out there is sometimes water changes are a waste of time and unnecessary. I think Triton has really made that apparent over the last decade. If the chemistry in your tank is spot on and matches natural seawater, there's little reason to value or change out nearly perfect water with nearly perfect water. This may be more true than ever with Triton's ICP testing and now even dissolved organic carbon and nitrogen testing, which were significant missing links in the whole equation. The availability of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus play all kinds of roles in the reef tank. The organic carbon and nitrogen testing is going to shed further clarity on the quality of water in our reef tanks. It's also absolutely true that there are many reefers out there that don't do all that testing and do minimal to no water changes and have had awesome success with their tanks. Anyone who says otherwise is just wrong. It is possible. Okay, so related to that, it's time to move on to the debatables. Let's start with two things. Can you really avoid water changes with the testing approach to doing water changes only as needed, as well as just what I'd call the eyeball method? So with the testing method, there are an increasing amount of methods out there which tell you water changes are only necessary when testing tells you water has deviated in a meaningful manner from natural seawater parameters. The most popular by a mile being Triton. I agree 100% that changing out high quality water with high quality water is a total waste of time and money. In a system like Triton, the only time that you bother with water changes is when ICP testing tells you to do so. At face value, I think this makes total sense. The only question comes into play here is what's easier or cheaper, the testing or the water changes themselves. This is my highly debatable take on it, but I think a good portion of the community which has tried both ways will agree. With an older established tank where the reefer has a balanced nutrient input to export as well as a stable biological load and filtration, these types of systems tend to not need a lot of testing, so sending a test every 3 months is probably adequate. This is limited work, but in my experience, when the test kit says change the water, like perform 10% water changes over the next 4 weeks, do it or expect some pretty negative things to start going down in the tank. The entire system here is 100% reliant that you're listening to the test and then not ignoring the results. However, I gotta tell you, once you stop doing all these water changes, it's pretty common to just stop wanting to do them altogether and not listen to the test. That's just not the most productive or positive path for the tank. In stark contrast to that is newer tanks in that first 1 to 2 years where the tank is finding stability. If this is your first tank or even second tank but of a much larger size or going after more sensitive corals like SPS, the nutrient input, nutrient export, coral load, fish load, filtration, maintenance habits of your newer tank is likely a million miles from stable. So the option is really just send in these monthly tests and do the water changes that will almost certainly tell you to do with these newer tanks, or just do them anyways and skip the tests, or at least do them less frequently. In the end, I think the cost in a lot of this will be about the same cost for 90% of the tank sizes out there, so a lot of this is just about sending in test kits or physical labor related to water changes. That's just a personal preference, but I think a good portion of reefers will find a balance in this with spending some effort to make the water changes easier and then reducing the reliance on physical labor. If they're ultra easy, the conversation is just very different. Okay, what about all those reefers who claim that they haven't done a single water change in 5 years, never sent in a single ICP test kit, and have an awesome tank? In their experience, water changes are a total waste of time. Open honest, no water change is often worn like a badge of honor, and they've figured out something the rest of us haven't. Well, straight up they have, and they should be proud, but there are some caveats to that. First, almost none of them started with 0 water changes. It was more of a progression where the reliance on water changes scaled down over many years. So this is often the result of a 3 to 10 year successful reefer, which puts them into the top 10 to 20% of reefers for sure. That path is often the result of solid research, strong intuition, and likely various degrees of luck. It's also 10 times easier with softy and polyps than it is LPS, and probably another 10 times more challenging with more sensitive species like SPS. So this is the best advice I can give. No or limited water changes is almost never the cause of a successful tank. It's almost always the result of doing everything else nearly perfect, and there's a decreased reliance on them. The water changes are just the ultimate stabilizer for non-perfection and reduces the reliance on perfection. So if reducing reliance on water changes on a 5 to 10 year tank with minimal mortalities and tons of thriving coral is a goal for you, I have 2 of the best pieces of advice. You're attempting to be part of a 1% clubs who treat it with that level of respect and seek out advice from those who have done it before. Particularly that 5 to 10 year success advice, because the reality is there's tons of 1 to 4 year approaches that ultimately fail, but just don't ever get talked about because that person just gets out of the hobby. There are many reefers on the forums who maintain successful minimal water changes and have shared photos so you can see it's similar to your goals. To be honest, I think the photos are the most valuable component because advice on a path is worthless if it isn't a path to where you want to go. The path for a largely soft or LPS tank is just different than a showstopper SPS tank. If they are willing to share their journey, how they started, how they got there, and what the approaches to success are, listen closely because their path resulted in near perfection with very limited reliance on the most common stabilizer with water changes. The path is just often very deliberate as it is a result of continuous intuitive or intelligent decisions, but ultra valuable in either case. To quote a good friend of mine, Greg Carroll, be wary of advice coming from those who will not show you the fruits of their successes. But the flip side is also true. Those who do show the fruits of their successes, but even more so take the time to share how they achieve them, deserve tremendous respect. No matter where we find ourselves today, it's those reefers who came before us and their willingness to share their experiences who helped us get here. Okay, so in that spirit, it's a good time to move on to WWC's approach to this, and really a good time to thank them again for not just showing the results related to their simple and stable approach to reefing, but more importantly, sharing the knowledge on how to replicate it. Between the two owners with Lou and Victor, as well as all of Josh's help, I think they have 100+ hours into sharing information with all of us through this series. I think this is also a good time to point out some of the motivations behind this simple and stable approach to reefing. Beyond being an obviously successful and replicable approach, simple and stable protects the business from catastrophic events and reduces risk to the tanks, which are the lifeblood of the business. But also the entire business is based on one thing, helping reefers find success with their tanks. Without successful reefers, there is no business, so sharing methods that work for the 90% versus the 1% is the most effective approach to that. So that said, their approach to water changes on the 900, 500, and 293 is 10 to 15% water changes every week in just a simple water container on wheels to make it easier. In the end, their approach is it just doesn't matter if it absolutely needs it at this moment. The overall stability and insurance that comes from small, frequent water changes and making sure they're done by default when it is required is what produces the best results for them and everyone who relies on them for simple and stable guidance for their tanks. For actual salt, they use Brightwell's Neo Marine, and no salt matches their exact needs, so they adjust the salt to their tank parameters prior to use. Okay, so where has the BRS team seen the most successes? Well, in this case, I'm going to separate the team and myself and share both independently. First, there are probably 20 personal tanks here set up at various desks, and almost everyone has a different approach, which is often most closely related not to their approach to reefing, but their available time for their tanks. This is a work environment after all. I'll just say this, the team members here who do regular water changes are dramatically and obviously more successful than those who don't. You can literally watch the deterioration of tanks during the busy season and Black Friday when we're all jamming here, and then bounce back in the spring to fall when we all have more time for proper maintenance, including those water changes. I think there's one thing here that basically every reefer will agree with, including customer service, which talks to 100+ reefers a day each, and that's, while not absolutely required to be successful, tanks which have regular water changes have dramatically higher success rates. For that reason, rather than put effort into avoiding them here at BRS, we put effort into making them easier with 3 different fresh and saltwater systems in the building. So everyone has easy access to water changes, some of them automated water changes. We also have retractable hoses and other elements which just make the water changes easier. Okay, so what about me personally? As one of the owners here at BRS, I wear a lot of hats, work 7-day, 55-hour+ work weeks. I also have a wife, 2.5-year-old, and a 4-month-old baby, and free time is not something that I have a lot of, and I'll just say it, there's zero chance that I'm capable of filling my free time with water changes. This was a huge reason why the Triton method was so attractive to me personally, double so when we debated it endlessly and couldn't find any significant holes in the theory or approach. My workload was also the inspiration for the ULM Ultra Low Maintenance series. I know I'm not the only one out there that's overloaded, so there has to be a solution for reefers who want a work-life tank balance where the tank doesn't take over or rely super heavily on you. So beyond sharing the same experience with everyone here, where regular water changes has been a part of all the most successful and high percentage, easy to replicate tanks I've encountered, I'm also going to share my experience with the 160 as well as the ULMs. For those of you that don't know, the BRS 160 started on the Zeovit system, which was 10% weekly water changes and enormously successful. There's a bit of daily work that goes with the Zeovit system, but the results were there, and in many ways I wish we never left Zeovit. Honestly, even more so after the coral nutrient episode we did, and you can start to understand why the Zeovit system is so likely to produce replicable, low-pass, clean, and healthy-looking reef tanks. However, it does require some daily effort to do properly, mostly just a quick pump of the rocks, dose a few nutritive elements, and the water changes. Moving on to the Triton method, it worked nearly flawlessly and resulted in way fewer water changes when we followed the system exactly. We sent in the test kits timely and acted on the suggestions. In many ways, I think Triton is the most intelligent and well thought out retail branded approach to reefing. It addresses all the most important components to reefing with not just a methodology, but a way to measure if it's working, which is also accountability. However, if you don't send in the kits or don't follow the direct advice, expect negative results. This is absolutely something that we were guilty of. From time to time, we would forget to send in the test kits and sometimes just didn't have the time to follow through on the recommendations. During those periods where we do run into occasional issues like coral tissue recession, thin tissue, pale corals, and even some mortalities, some reefers will tell you those issues are just part of the game, but I'll say as soon as we got it back on plan, all that goes away. So at first glance, if we show you the tank, most people would say, hey, nice tank, whatever they're doing seems to be working. But if you watch closely, we're also sharing that we're running into some occasional issues, and sharing the entire story that goes beyond a single image is valuable to those trying to emulate the success. So some issues might just be part of the game, but we can absolutely manage or reduce them with direct efforts. In our case with the 160, we just decided to put the tank on auto water changes because there just is going to be a higher success rate associated with making water changes easier than eliminating them in this work environment. Now with the ULMs, or ultra low maintenance tanks, in my office, this is what we call a tank trial series where we implement some methods, follow it, and share how it goes. I learned three things about ULMs in this case. First, ULM is less about tank design and equipment used, and it is the style or type of tank. Second, automatic water changes don't just reduce the work, but also the ultimate stabilizer for those who are busy and might miss other steps as well. Third, not doing water changes in the first year and relying on tests is a pretty low percentile approach, double so for a person with a ULM approach where it's not just the physical work, but also the mental load that we're trying to reduce. Net result, the softy and polyp tanks with the auto water changes has been thriving since day one. These are easy forgiving corals, and if you want easy forgiving tank that requires little maintenance, that starts with livestock that's easy forgiving and requires minimal maintenance. Not everyone is looking for a softy or polyp tank, but those who are, I think would call this ULM a success. In this case, this is what taking care of this tank looks like. Fill the auto feeder every month or so, clean the glass as needed, refill the 1-part tropic marin all for reef calcium and alkalinity every 2 months, and then mix new salt water for the Neptune dose-based automatic water changes every month or two, but no carrying buckets. Other than cleaning glass as needed, I think there's no more than 20 minutes put into this tank a month. In stark contrast to that, both the SPS and LPS ULM, which are going to be based on only testing-related water changes, failed. SPS completely and the LPS just mostly. In the end, we just shut the SPS ULM down because I think it was a fundamentally flawed thought process. We just shouldn't consider a tank based around the most sensitive species of corals, a ULM tank. There might be a path to lower maintenance, but it's not the correct mentality from the get-go. With the LPS ULM, we switched over to the tropic marin, all for reef, 1-part, and auto water changes, and the tank is turning around appropriately. The LPS tank requires more testing attention, but I think we ultimately only require slightly more attention than the polyp tank. So if I had to sum up all of our experience together into a single sentence, I'd say this: the highest percentage results will be achieved with a regular water change schedule and making them easy to perform so they're actually done on time, every time, regardless of your particular work, life, or tank balance that week, month, or year. Lastly, because people ask all the time, I agree with WWC. I don't think you're going to see drastic biological results from one salt to the next, but I do think some mix better, some hold stable parameters longer in storage, some mix with tons or almost no gunk in the mixing bins, some are slightly cheaper than others, some closer to your actual tank parameters, and some have verifiable quality standards. The 3 salts that we've used here in the past have been HW, Red Sea, and Tropic Marin more recently. Tropic Marin being the current option because it meets most of those goals for us the best. All of those things you're going to see Randy dig into in the upcoming weeks with BRStv Investigates. Okay, so what is the BRS WWC hybrid method for water changes? Well, just as a reminder, to meet WWC requirements, it needs to be simple and stable at all costs, meaning two things. You don't have to be an electrical engineer or marine biologist to produce results, and no unnecessary equipment or complexities. Stable meaning three things. Equipment or additives are chosen based on reliability over features, relies on time-tested proven methods, elimination of failure points, and over-reliance on technology. In addition to that, to meet BRS requirements, the method needs to be applicable to a home or office environment, meaning that it respects that reefers work, sleep, and travel, so we're frequently away from the tank. Meaning understanding there just isn't a team of trained professionals taking care of the tanks on a daily basis. We're also going to fulfill the commitment to building a hybrid system, which will also address a variety of budgets and skill levels almost anyone can follow and expect to achieve very similar results. In that spirit, we're going to attempt to offer an option where low cost is a priority, common option, which is often that balance of cost and features, and the high-end option, which often costs double or triple, but comes with legit advantages for those that value or require them. So applying everything that we discussed today, I don't think anyone is going to be surprised that we're going to suggest 10 to 15% weekly water changes, 10% weekly in more robust, stable tanks, and 15% in newer stages or years of a tank. In terms of cost, I think there's the salt itself and then the method, with salt, instant ocean often being the lowest cost, HW, Red Sea, and Brightwell Neo Marine being middle of the road, and Tropic Marin being the high end, and at least what the BRS team believes as the best option out there. And we use Tropic Marin system-wide, both on our actual tanks as well as experiments. In terms of cost, the only thing that I'd point out here is this isn't LED lighting where the chasm between the lowest cost and the best options is thousands of dollars. In this case, it's often like $5 a month, so it may or may not be relevant. However, with water change solutions, they'll vary wildly in price. Obviously, the lowest cost option is a 5-gallon bucket and just carrying it around. So I'm not even really going to mention that. Only thing I'll say is if you have wood floors, hauling around buckets of salt water all over is probably going to be the most expensive option available because you're almost certain to frequently spill on them and ruin the floors, which is super expensive. I say that as someone who has destroyed more than one set of flooring in my life. So in terms of low-cost options to make water changes easier, something like the Python is the most obvious. Just a tube which hooks up to your faucet, starts a siphon and sucks water out of the tank. Getting water out of the tank is just a messier, bigger pain in the butt than putting water in the tank. So these types of solutions are super helpful both in making it easier as well as cleaner. Similar to here at BRS, we've also used the Python replacement parts and then hooked them up to the retractable garden hose solutions to make coiling the hose up easy as well. The garden hose is obviously only good for used water going down the drain, but Zach here has actually taken one of those apart and put a Python in it to make something retractable and suitable for carrying water from the storage bin to replenish the tank as well. So moving on to the mid-range items, the Auto Aqua option is probably the mid-range option for auto water change systems at $200, and there's upgradable outlets for other pumps and such to fit most solutions. Similar to that, if you already own a Neptune Apex, a Dose is the ideal water change solution and in the same price bracket. Main difference here being the Auto Aqua relies on water level sensors for accuracy, and the Neptune Dose relies on calibratable dosing pumps for accurate changes of water. In that spirit, I think the Neptune Dose, coupled with the Apex or Apex EL, is probably considered the high-end or best auto water change option out there as well. It's my hope that they come out with a minimalist Apex in the future to allow reefers access to solutions like the Dose, Core, Wave, AFS, or Trident that don't have an Apex. But for now, a Dose and an Apex EL at $800 is arguably the best auto water change solution out there. I say best because I think it's the best dosing pump in our industry for this kind of thing. Pushes and pulls water from many rooms away, upstairs, downstairs, easy to set up with tasks, and then gives reporting. Some of you might think that you can't do auto water changes in your house, but with the Neptune Dose, almost anyone can. It's just a pair of 1/4-inch tubes that go through the wall, ceiling, floor, or go into a clean solution like a cord channel. The most obvious solutions being going through the floor with basements or crawl spaces, or just fishing the tubing through the ceiling into the room that you need it. So what are we going to do for all three tanks here? The XXL 750, the BRS 160, and the E-Series 170, well, all three have Apexes on the tanks, and there's just no way you can force me to not use the Dose on all of them. For those of you that wish we use something a bit less expensive, the price doesn't really matter in terms of results. All we are is changing out water, so it doesn't matter if it's a 5-gallon bucket and your time, a bin on wheels like the WWC or the Neptune Dose, the results will be the same as long as it's done consistently. With the Neptune dose, we're going to set up 3% daily water changes, and we'll probably scale it back over time, maybe 2.5% in year 2 and 2% in year 3 or 4, as the tank shows signs of being ready for that. We also just find that 3% is the ideal preventative solution in stabilizer, particularly for the smaller E170, where the smaller volume of water has a small buffer to chemistry changes or potential pollutants. So that wraps up today's episode. Over on Reef to Reef, this week's poll: is a good water change schedule an important component of a long-term success with an SPS-dominant tank? I can't wait to see what people say. If you have any questions on anything related to water changes, be on the lookout for when Randy and I go live every Monday at 3 p.m. Central and answer these questions in real time with a bit more in-depth thoughts and uncut answers. You can hit our channel at 3 p.m. CST to catch it, or just subscribe and hit the notification bell to be instantly notified. We also go live on Facebook, so just like our page and under following, hit See First to be notified. We can't hit every question, so if you really want to know something specific about your tank, the best place is to ask on the Facebook group, #AskBRStv. Not only Randy, the team, and myself answer these questions, but the BRS community really engages with each other, with like-minded and friendly reefers. Well, the BRS team has business hours. The entire BRS community often answers within minutes, which is an awesome tool. Lastly, no week is complete without giving away something away for free, so marine collectors and us are giving away that Gem Tang. So if you want one of the cooler fish in the hobby but don't want to have to explain it to anyone reading your credit card bill, now's the time. So hit that link in the lower left or head on over to the site and hit the free prizes link. See you next week with our live at 3 p.m. Central, Monday and Friday at noon with another episode of BRStv.